graduated, elevated. Now it's my time to shine. Yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves.
Hello and welcome to Ph.D. Hard Talk. I am your host, Noma Mguni, and welcome, Chris. Could you please take me through who you are and what you do, and then we'll crack on with our conversation today.
So I'm Chris Lewis, and I run Chris's Cancer Community. I was a business consultant by my trade until I got cancer in 2007. That was life-changing in so many ways, which I won't go into now, but it's brought me up till today. Now I'm a global advocate, I suppose, for people affected by cancer. I believe we can do cancer much better, changing simple things, not just pumping billions of pounds into it. And I want to try and be the change that as best I can, really.
Excellent. So in terms of, Chris's community, what is it? What are the objectives? And why did you start it?
Okay, so let's start why I started it actually in the beginning. So cancer, so I was diagnosed in 2007, and I was diagnosed with stage 4 blood cancer. And as they told me at the time, there is no stage 5. So that was quite frightening. I had a lot of work done, including a stem cell transplant from a donor that came forward. That donor was in London, so I was very lucky. But what that meant was that my life as it was then, I was jetting around the world with my business. I was in the rad trade, buying and selling ladies' clothing around the world. So that was great fun for me. But that all came crashing down once hearing that word cancer. So my life changed then, and I became a passenger in my own life rather than a driver, because as you'll tell from this conversation, I'm not a shy guy. And I've always worked for myself. I've never really worked for anybody else. So I'm used to making decisions. But when cancer came, it wasn't me that was making the decisions, right? It was the medical professionals. So from being a relatively healthy guy for 50 plus years, I became very poorly very quickly. And it wasn't looking like that I'd make the 6 months. So that was life-changing, and what it meant was that I saw probably the real value in my life. Time was, I saw this big clock every day ticking, and it gave me a different perspective of what I wanted to do with my life if I was able to do that. Down to my wonderful team, the incredible donor, and unbelievable people around me, my family, everybody kept me on the track, and a big piece of luck. So I survived. I'm here to tell the tale, 15 years later. So being in the clinic and being in hospitals for many years in my earlier days, I saw a lot of frightened people. I was frightened in my own way, but I saw a lot of vulnerable people too. And the system I saw, I didn't think the systems were particularly helpful to those people, and it looked like they were getting pushed to the side. And, the more I looked, the more I found. And I thought, am I the only guy? Am I the only person that thinks like this? So I started talking more in the clinic, and I found that I wasn't, and then I thought, how do I amplify this? How do I get more outside? And I got invited to a couple of conferences, really, where it all started. And, I like to say it as I find it. And I wasn't impressed with the cancer scene. I wasn't impressed with it. And I wanted to say that. And I didn't want to destroy it, that system. I wanted to improve it. From a business point of view, if you don't see the problems, you don't find the answers, right? So if you want to glaze over and say there's no problem, it can easily be done. But there we are. So I thought I'd shake the tree, and it was great shaking the tree. I got quite a few invites, but that became problematic in itself, because my health was unreliable, and so it was a pressure whether I was going to be fit enough in 6 weeks to go and do the talk. So it became pressurized. But I I was lucky, if you like, that the internet was starting to come to the fore. And of course, you know, my way of communication was ringing people up. That's all I knew. I've got some great friends who are really into it, you know, the internet, and they said, Chris, this is the way, you know, this is the way forward. So they set me up with a very simple website, and I thought, all right, okay, now who's going to want to listen to it? Who's going to want to listen to me? I thought I was a moaning Minnie, you know, just moaning, complaining all the time. But actually, I wrote a few posts and began to get an audience. And it wasn't long before I won an award in that year. And for Health Blogger, UK Health Blogger of the Year. And I was astounded that actually people were reading it to that level. So that set me on the path, really. It gave me the confidence that what I was doing was right. And, you know, ever since then, we've gone bigger and better. Technology has improved and helped me improve the way that I communicate. So the reason I started it in short term was that the system for cancer people is no good. And by that, not just the people that are directly affected by it, but the families, friends and carers, importantly. It's no good. It's still no good. It's a bit better than it was. But unfortunately, COVID has now set us back probably 10 years in the improvements that we made before COVID.
So, you know, how you've just said there, that it's set us back 10 years from where we were. And we know that with COVID-19, a lot of the surgeries, etc., they were literally put on hold or cancelled. And now they're trying to catch up, and they're not really catching up with the speed that we expected it to be. So from your own opinion, what advice do you have for, you know, for example, I go to the NHS, some people can afford to go private. So what advice do you have for those families that are home that are looking at the private, you know, aspect of things, and they're willing to probably remortgage, etc., just to do what they need to do for their loved ones? What advice do you have?
On the private issue?
Yes.
Private issues, it's quite an interesting thing, actually, particularly around cancer, because what people don't understand, I mean, I had the option to go private, actually, when I was diagnosed, but I chose not to, and I'm really pleased that I chose not to, because my care has gone into millions of pounds, and quite honestly, I don't think I'd still be alive if I chose private care, because so much of it wouldn't have been available in those days. Private care is one of those things that it's quite difficult actually with cancer, because cancer, you don't know where it's going to go and what's going to happen with it, right? So you know what your initial diagnosis is, and hopefully it's straightforward. Hopefully you have surgery, chemo or radiotherapy, whatever it is, and hopefully that might be the end of your story, in which case happy days. But generally cancer isn't like that. It becomes very tricky to deal with, even the most simple cases. And the problem is going backwards and forwards to private health care to try and is a concern in itself. It's not straightforward with cancer care. And also, by the way, not every bit of care that you might need is provided in private hospitals. So private hospitals, in my opinion, are more for something straightforward, like cataracts, new knees and hips, and something a bit more straightforward. But even then, if there are complications with whatever you've had done, you still have to go back into the NHS. Right? Right?
Yeah. Wow.
So the private care, in principle, you know, if you sign your check away and you think that everything's covered, it's very far from that. In fact, what's actually happening now, you're talking about people remortgaging and stuff like that, and actually what's happening now on websites like GoFundMe and the likes, of which there are many, we both know there are many of those, right? Many people are fundraising on there for treatments that are not provided in the UK. So whether you have private care or you don't, some of your care might not fit into the private or NHS bracket. And it might not be done here. It might mean you might have to go to America, you might have to go to somewhere in Europe, right? So that's a whole new situation. So I chose not to have private care, but in some cases I understand why people would. But it's in cancer, it's much more complex than you might think, than just signing the check.
And in terms of, you know, the NHS, there's been talks that, you know, they are maybe in the future that it might be privatized. And you've just basically said, you know, if you do go private, you know, the payment sometimes they'll bring you back to the NHS, or maybe they might not have the service that you need or require at that moment in time. So you still have to come back. What's your take on the NHS being privatized and looking at the current inflation?
Terrible. Quite honestly, I look at, so cancer's not just a problem that's in England, or it's not just a problem that I have in Croydon where I live, right?
Yeah.
Big plug for Croydon there. Cancer is a global issue, right?
Yes.
It's a global issue, and I look at the issue in its entirety. So when I first started, everyone told me, right, America, this is the place to go. You can get anything in America if you pay, right? And to a degree, that was true, because research, look, they're happy for new customers, right? They want it. The drug companies, they can't wait for new people to come, right, to try their drugs. So of course, everyone's happy. No guarantees of success, but there's a commercial aspect to it, right? That people forget. This is a business.
It is.
But if you look now, this was happening pre-COVID, by the way. It's not something that's happened just because of COVID. People in America, a lot of them can't forget the financial issue for 1 minute, but they can't actually get the care that they need, whether they're paying or they're not paying, right? Because quite simply, cancer globally is not a priority anymore, sadly. And I never thought I'd say that. I never thought I'd say that cancer wasn't a priority. It's one of the biggest killers in the world. You know, the UK statistics tell us that 50% of our country, i.e. 30 million people, will be directly affected by cancer. But I ask you now, right, you watch the news, you listen to the news, you listen to all those channels you were telling me about before we came on live, right? How often do you hear cancer mentioned?
Not much.
Right, not much, because we've got cost of living, gas bills, COVID, long COVID, whatever it is, right? Many, many things in front of cancer. We've got the war, right? We've got all of that going on. And I'm telling you, cancer and other health conditions, big health conditions, you know, heart disease, the other one. Anyway, I've forgotten that one.
Yeah.
But there are so many others. They're just not a priority in the world currently. So you will still struggle to get the treatment you need.
So I guess, you know, I'm sorry, I keep bringing you back to the NHS, and I'm looking at the current situation as well. We have a shortage for nurses, we've got a shortage for carers, and you've just highlighted there that 30,000, 30, is it million? Yeah, million people. And I'm looking at our current situation, the numbers for the NHS, they're quite low when it comes to staff, you know, and you're highlighting something that, you know, I wouldn't have noticed. You know, I've looked at the adverts on TV actually. You know, I'm thinking about it now. You don't really get to see, except for Mary Curie and cancer
Macmillan and cancer research. They're the only ones that can afford to put adverts on, right?
Literally. So I guess, you know, in your opinion, because I'm thinking that there's a lot of people that think the same way as you do, and they've observed the same thing. What advice do you have for us in research that actually researching in terms of the cure, or, you know, medication, etc. What advice do you have for us? Because we can champion that essentially if we're researching it in terms of the importance, the value, and we need funding as well, which is the third aspect. But what advice do you have for us?
Get louder, to be honest with you. And I don't know, I do have some ideas about that, but this is probably not the place to discuss it. So if I talk about cancer research specifically, in the media recently, and it's something that we know logically must happen, healthcare is a massive business. That's first of all, we must understand that. Healthcare is, and someone somewhere has to make a decision on what's economical and what isn't economical, right? So thus you have in cancer, which is my area of expertise, you have areas, say, for example, breast cancer, which get a good percentage of the research money goes into breast cancer. Now, but I can take you to pancreatic cancer, that their statistics of success, basically, I shouldn't really use the word success, failure hasn't changed for 50 years. Right now, breast cancer, things are improving slightly in the breast cancer world. And by that, I mean, there's more exposure about it. Right. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but I will anyway, because there's a sexiness to breast cancer, right? I know men get it as well, by the way, but it's become a commercial runner. People have picked up on the pinkness, which is, you know, quite honestly rubbish. If you go into Breast Cancer Awareness Month in America, the whole bloody thing turns pink, right? And it's so tacky, it's incredible, but it gets an audience. It gets an audience. Probably more people are affected by breast cancer than most, I would imagine, and there's more work done on breast cancer than most. So that doesn't make it right. Is that the right one to focus on? Not necessarily, but they do. Why? Because it's commercial, right? What happens when you start going into other areas? Say, for example, prostate cancer, bowel cancer, where people don't want to talk about those areas, right? They don't want to mention their poo and stuff like that. That's very, very difficult area. Cervical cancer, you know, there's more women now dying of cervical cancer. There is a cervical screening, less people, 30% don't even turn up for it, right? So there's an area of commerciality that comes into it, and the less discussed cancers get less money, basically. Does that make any sense?
No, it does, and it's making me think. And to be honest, if I have to be honest, I didn't think of it in that way. And you know, when we see the pink ribbons, like you've just mentioned there, you know, I'm doing it for the cause, but I don't really think, you know, that there is gender, you know, there's males and females, and
males
that
do get it, right?
Yeah. And we've just labeled it as this is what it is. We've put it in a box. And I guess there's need to educate us as the, you know, in terms of the community. Because I didn't think about it that way. You've just challenged my thinking in terms of observation. And in terms of funding then, as you've rightly pinpointed in terms of businesses that, you know, well, pharmaceuticals per se, they've realized that there's money to be made. For example, we've got plastic surgeons. They usually, you know, they'll put the implants in, and you know, they will talk about, you know, the journey from when, you know, the diagnosis came and now they feel like a woman again, or they'll get tattoos, or you know, whatever is available in terms of the media, because the media is the driver in terms of what's relevant or what should be trending. And I use that word loosely, but it is all on trends. Please don't come for me on Twitter. But now I'm going back to bowel cancer, as you've mentioned, that, you know, how do you make poo look very fancy? You can't. So what should we do in terms of pancreatic cancer and also bowel cancer and also blood as well, because you know, I know of it, but I don't really understand. How do we push the word out there?
Well, if you watch my tweets, it's actually after we do this, I'll be doing some tweets this afternoon about blood cancer awareness, because actually it's Blood Cancer Awareness Month. Right, every cancer's got a month somewhere, which it's a good reminder. Don't get me wrong for people, but people get busy on the month and then they've forgotten about it because they've moved on to the next month. You know, going back to your poo situation, you know, Deborah James, Dame Deborah, is somebody I knew personally, so I can say this. She did. I don't know anyone who's done more incredible work about getting poo discussed than Deborah, right? And very sad case, Deborah. You know, I knew her before she got cancer. I knew her when she was just starting with cancer, and obviously I met her all the way through. So I know the story well, and she's done more than I think anyone in terms of bowel cancer. I can't name anybody, any celeb, inverted commas, that's done more than she's done. But still, you know, poor Deborah, rest in peace. There was a big to-do, you know, she got made a dame and all of this, that, and the other, and all the politicians were all over it like a rash. Great picture opportunity. There's me being very cynical there with a dying lady, right? And actually, I don't think I've heard bowel cancer mentioned ever since that sort of period of time. And now we've got various other celebrities that have come along have got breast cancer, right? Various presenters and the likes. You know, you both know what we're talking about here. And that comes poor Bill. I can't remember his name. The presenter guy. He just recently died. Very nice man. Died of prostate cancer. Can't remember his second name. Sorry, Bill. But and again, we have this big thing, you know, poor Bill, we must do more for prostate cancer. But then someone else comes, you know, the news is fast moving, social media trends, as you rightly say. What can we do more? Actually, that's a good question, because we do bowel cancer screening. Some might argue it might not be early enough, because a lot of us now are getting more impacted by cancer a lot earlier. You know, that used to be known as an old person's cancer, as did prostate, but now I know people in their 40s and 30s that are getting it. So the world's changing fast, and it's an area that we don't like to talk about. Really, that's the problem. You know, even in social, these are things. This is something that society's got to deal with, right? It's not something you've got to learn at school. It's something society's got to deal with, because the rate that cancer is coming for us, society must deal with it, because we can't have half the people on one side that have got cancer and the other half are peddling harder to support those people. Right? We can't have that. So as a society, you know, the workplace is wrong for a start off. Everyone discriminates against someone with cancer. That's the one big thing I found, and I was really upset with that. You know, if you tell your bank, despite the wonderful adverts you'll see, all they want you to do is repay the money if you've got a mortgage. That's all they're interested in. They won't lend you any more money, and they want their money back because they're not sure how long you're going to last, right? Yeah. You apply for a job, you've got to tick the box. Have you got a disability? Mm-hmm. That was put in so that we weren't discriminated against. Ho, ho, ho. What genius worked that one out, right? As soon as you tick the box, your application, with respect, is in the bin or in the shredder, right? So there's a lot of people with cancer that can work, even if it's only part-time. They can do something, but society don't really want them at the moment. This is where we are with society. We don't like sickness. We don't like people who are not 100% able. We don't like them. Where do they fit?
Yeah. Those are challenging questions, I think, for our governors. And I guess the next question that I have, you know, to which we've seen, I mean, I've read papers, so I read a lot of papers, and you know, some of the food from the food industry is a big contributor, so they say, based on findings. And you know, you've touched on the society, and we've touched slightly on the government. I mean, I saw that on BBC One. I can mention that, you know, in terms of what you touched on, just vaguely, and the pictures, etc. And it becomes fast moving and really trending, and then it goes off and something else takes over. So it is true. We see that in research as well, widely. You know, if there's a new management technique, we'll run with it, and then it's on to the next, which isn't great because sometimes we don't know what the root cause is and we don't really fix it. We make it trending and then we move on to the next thing. So what I'm trying to touch on is the food aspect of things. What advice do you have to the big manufacturing firms, and also from an agricultural perspective? We know the pesticides, etc. You know, it's the quantities, because I've spoken to somebody who touched on this, and it is his research. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in it, to be honest with you. I think the big the big food companies are as dominant as the big pharmaceutical companies, so which is dangerous, quite honestly. Obviously, I'm a boy. I was born in the 50s, right? And if I look at all the stuff that was around me then, I mean, we didn't have fast food, right? So. And if you watch a lot of footage from those days, I'm sure you'll have seen it, even if you watch Top of the Pops, right? In the early 60s, there wasn't an overweight person, obese. That person, you didn't see them. You know, you see old footage from football matches, and everybody was really slim, and you know. So what's happened since we've had? It's no coincidence. Let's be honest. I haven't done the research that your friend might have done, but it's no coincidence that since we've had fast food, a lot more sugar and all of that sort of thing, kids have got hooked on it. You know, the hamburgers and all these different offers and the link ups with Disney and all that. The whole thing is corrupt, basically. And the likes of, with respect, Coca-Cola, Kellogg's, all of the really big boys, the ones that sponsor all the major events, McDonald's and all of these, they, I believe, are a big contributor to the issues we have with cancer today. Not that long ago, within the last 20 years, cancer only affected 1 in 3. Oh, sorry, pardon me. 1 in 3. Now it's 1 in 2. So I believe that there's a combination of things, right? If you do global research, which I assume your friend has done, if you look in places like Japan and not China now so much, because China have caught up with the Western world, they've got fast food wherever you go. But if you go in places like China, Japan and India and some of those different places, right, their cancers are very different, and they break out different cancers in different areas because of different foods, different environments, basically. So look, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist, but you know, I look at the logic of it all. The way we live our life, we've got fast food, processed food, chemicals, as you mentioned, right, so important. Chemicals to preserve things, you know, for 3 months at a time. It can't be good for us, can it? It can't be. Society has become dependent on technology. You know, this is about improving lives. And 10 years, you wouldn't even know who I am. Okay.
What prompted you to start that?
Yes, there's good things and bad things, but we can argue about that till the cows come home. They couldn't communicate because they're dry.